Will was born in a world full of magic, but he didn't have any magic skills. Despite this, he wanted to become the strongest magician by defeating all the monsters in the dungeon with his sword. He lived in a place where magic was highly valued, and even though he got into a top academy, people doubted how he could succeed without magic. To prove himself, he practiced his sword skills and regularly went into dangerous dungeons. He fought huge beasts that used magic against him, but he dodged their spells and cut them down effortlessly with his fast sword moves. After many battles, he knew that he had to face even more monsters to survive. The next day, tired but determined, he went to class, where Professor Edward taught them about alchemy and making explosives with sulfur. Edward noticed Will nodding off in the back of the class, so he called out his name. But Will, unaware of this, kept on snoring softly until Edward shouted his name loudly. Startled, Will jumped to his feet immediately. Edward asked Will to come to the front and demonstrate what they had just discussed. With no other option, Will nervously went up in front of the entire class. Edward told him it was very easy. All he had to do was produce flames, and sulfur would be created. Trembling, Will took out his wand and tried to conjure flames with a spell, but to his dismay, not even a tiny spark came out. The students burst into laughter, treating it like a comedy show, but Edward silenced them. Edward looked at Will with disappointment, wondering about how someone so good in theory could fail so miserably in practice. He expressed disbelief at Will's lack of practical magic and questioned how he had even been accepted into the academy. Just then, a confident boy named Shion with red hair stepped forward. He effortlessly used his flame magic to burn the items on the desk, creating sulfur in the process. While Will shrank back, Edward warned Shion for using magic without his permission. Edward emphasized the importance of magic in their world, praising mages as heroes. He made it clear that to succeed at the academy, students needed to excel in magic. He criticized those who couldn't control magic, suggesting they should leave the academy if they couldn't keep up, indirectly telling Will to leave the academy. After class, Shion and his friends approached Will, mocking him for only being able to handle low-level dungeon monsters. Just then, Will's childhood friend Colette stepped in and defended him, telling Shion to back off because Will was much kinder than him and his gang. Shion brushed it off with a laugh, saying that kindness and hard work wouldn't get you far without magic, and then he walked away with his friends. Colette tried to comfort Will, telling him not to worry too much, but Will seemed accustomed to this bullying. He then looked up at the sky and admired its beauty. Years ago, humans lived under a darkness cast by evil spirits, fearing their shadow. Then, 5 legendary mages known as Magia Vanders bravely fought these spirits and liberated humanity, revealing the true sky once more. The title of Magia Vanders now belonged to the world's most powerful mages. Will recalled a promise he had made with his childhood friend Elfiria, who used to show him storybooks about the Magia Vanders. They vowed to become Magia Vanders themselves someday. Elfiria fulfilled her promise, rising swiftly through the ranks. With her incredible talent, and to become the youngest Magia Vander in history, residing in the Divine Tower. Meanwhile, Will struggled, barely clinging to their shared dream. Later that day, Will went to meet Professor Werkner, who got furious upon learning that Will had ventured alone into level 7 dungeons. Werkner yelled at him, warning that he could get himself killed one day. Will fell to the ground, apologizing, but he also asked if he would receive any credit for his efforts. Werkner sighed and reluctantly awarded him 2 credits. Will rejoiced, but Werkner then questioned if he still hadn't given up on becoming a Magia Vander. Werkner then explained that to even have a chance at becoming a Vander, Will needed to enter the Upper Institute, which required earning credits in writing, spell work, and combat. Without being able to use spells, Will wouldn't be able to earn any spell work credits, making it impossible to qualify, regardless of his performance in the other areas. Will asserted that he was determined to become a Magia Vander no matter what. Werkner reminded him that he first needed to graduate, informing him that he needed 4 more credits by the week's end to continue studying in this academy. This revelation shocked Will, who immediately set out to find monsters that could earn him those credits. Werkner mentioned a monster named Baskerville on the 6th floor that hadn't been defeated yet. Overjoyed, Will hugged his teacher. However, Shion overheard their conversation and decided to head to the dungeons himself to kill all the monster before Will entered the cave with his familiar Kiki, instructing her to use her keen sense of smell to locate the monster. However, Kiki seemed hesitant, remembering how she was burned by a Baskerville's breath during their last encounter. On the other hand, Shion and his friends also ventured into the sixth floor, determined to find the beast before Will, to reduce his chances to graduate. One of Shion's followers, with distinctive pink hair, questions, "Can only 3 mages able to tackle 6th floor of dungeon?" Shion angrily dismissed him, asserting his own skills and ordering them to use their scan magic to pinpoint the monster's location. Suddenly, a massive monster emerged and struck the spiky-haired boy so hard that he was flattened against the wall. Shion was left frozen in shock, unable to move, while the pink-haired follower screamed in terror. Will heard the scream and instantly jumped to his feet, running with lightning speed towards the noise, worried someone was hurt. Turning a corner, he found Shion on the ground, casting fire blasts at a monstrous creature known as the Sentinel. However, the monster seemed unfazed by the flames and continued advancing towards the terrified Shion. Recognizing the Sentinel as an incredibly strong monster worth 10 credit scores, Will wondered why it was in such a low-level dungeon. He realized Shion's magic was ineffective against the creature, which ignored the fire blasts aimed at it. Despite Shion bullying him in the past, Will hesitated about whether to help him or not. Then he remembered Elfiria, who had always seen him as a kind person and had given him a pair of glasses as a gift. Putting on the glasses reminded Will of his true nature. As the monster raised its weapon to strike Shion down, Will intervened just in time, blocking the attack and forcing the monster away to save Shion's life. Meanwhile, back at the academy, Edward entered Werkner's room telling him that Shion and his followers had entered the 6th floor without permission. Werkner understood the gravity of the situation, but assured Edward not to worry, as Will was also on the same floor in the dungeon as Shion and his group. Will clashed repeatedly with the monster, skillfully blocking its attacks and moving around it. With a swift slash, he cut off one of the monster's fingers, enraging it further. The monster tried to strike back, but Will dodged effortlessly, moving with agility like an eagle in flight. He gets blasted back, and then the monster throws rocks at him, but he cuts through them easily. He jumps around the monster and lands on its back, then stabs it through the neck. The monster starts falling, and Shion is shocked to see Will's abilities. Back at the academy, Edward is also shocked. Werkner says that Will is an outcast because he has no magical abilities, but he has super strength, toughness like a dwarf, and a brain that learns attack patterns just by looking once. They watch as Will slashes off the monster's arm and calmly walks to a giant sword on the ground. Will picks it up effortlessly. Werkner tells Edward that in a world of magic, Will is the only warrior. The monster shoots an energy beam, but Will blocks it with the giant sword and slashes the monster into pieces. Will then help Shion, who looks shocked, while Edward screams that someone without magic can't surpass a magician and storms off. Werkner realizes that Edward can't accept reality. He knows Will's story will become legend, turning Wisteria into a place where swords and wands meet. After returning from the dungeon, Professor Werkner gets mad at Will, but then he awarded 10 credit points to him for defeating that monster. Then we see a scene from 5 years earlier, when Will, despite not having magic, gets admitted to the academy thanks to Elfiria's influence. The academy considers expelling Will due to his lack of magic, but Headmistress and Werkner intervenes. Impressed by Will's dispelling spells, using a dagger and his own strength, Werkner and Headmistress decide to allow Will to stay, despite objections from others. In an emotional moment, Will asks if he can reach the top of the tower by studying at the academy. The Headmistress responds, saying that if Will works hard with courage and determination, he can achieve it. The scene then shifts to a classroom where Professor Werkner is teaching students about becoming Magiavander. First, they have to reach the top of the tower, means gaining admission into the Upper Institute, which has 2 paths: presenting unique magic spell or collecting 7,200 credits. Most students struggle with the first path, leaving only the second option. Professor Werkner holds extra classes for those facing graduation problems. Will leaves the class and meets Colette, discussing how Professor Werkner sacrifices his valuable time for extra classes. Meanwhile, Professor Edward declines taking extra classes without thinking about it. In the hall, as Will and Colette advance, they notice Shion, informing all of his friends that he defeated the evil sentinel, the same monster Will fought and defeated. Shion's friends are telling everyone else about it, that when we regained consciousness, we saw Shion had defeated that evil sentinel and saved us all. Everyone praises Shion for this achievement, thinking he might soon become top tier. However, Shion knows the truth inside. He notices Will passing by angrily and grabs his collar, questioning him sarcastically about how someone like him managed to do such a thing without any talent. Despite his anger, Shion doesn't reveal the truth about defeating the Sentinel to everyone and leaves quietly. Colette asks Will if something happened among them, but Will denies it. Now we see the headmaster's office, where Professor Edward requests that Will be expelled from the academy. Professor Edward is very serious about this matter. He says that someone who cannot use magic can still be so capable that they can surpass those who can use magic. How is this possible? The headmaster mentions Professor Edward's request, saying that Will is in his last year, his 6th year, nearing graduation, so it's not possible to expel him from the academy. Professor Edward insists that Will cannot use magic, and this academy is for mages, not warriors. The headmaster says that if we overlook Will's inability to use magic, he excels in every other field so much that no one in the entire academy can match him. The goal of this academy is to provide good education to children, and in this regard, I will conduct an exam with Will. Since you've read about Will's secret, the responsibility for this test will be yours. You can do anything in this test. After this, it's up to you to decide what to do with Will. After Colette sees a sword in Will's locker, she tells him that he still hasn't changed. Will explains that he can't bring his sword to the classroom, and people in his dormitory also don't like it, which is why he might have to leave it here. In the study room, he studies all the subjects from different angles. He has to do this, because if he loses even 1 credit in writing, he won't move up to the higher institute. All this hard work even gave Will a white hair, which Colette really wants to pull out. Their noise is stopped by Edward. Edward tells Will to come with him to the spell room alone. With a big smile, Edward says he's giving Will an extra lesson, just for him. He wants to find out Will's future, but he's not sure if he'll succeed. Will's task is to land a single hit on him. If Will succeeds, Edward promises him giving 5 credits for spells. If he fails, he'll be kicked out of the academy. Will has no option to retreat. Will doesn't understand what's happening with him. Now in parallel, we're shown the scene in the headmaster's office, where Professor Werkner is summoned. The headmaster uses his magic to show Professor Werkner, Professor Edwards, and Will's fight. Upon seeing this, Professor Werkner is not happy at all. The headmaster says, "I'm not going to cancel this test. Just like I granted your request of allowing Will to study in this academy, Professor Edwards' request of testing Will is also allowed." Werkner asks Headmaster, "You know that Professor Edward is closest to becoming a Magiavander. He has so much power that he can even defeat a Magiavander." On the other side, Professor Edward is near the fight with Will, where Professor Edward says to Will, "If you want to become a Magiavander, then you have to land a single strike on me." Will tries to land a hit on him, but Professor Edward is too strong for him. He tries to kick him but fails, due to a magical shield. Will thinks Professor is using their weak spells. Despite their weakness, these spells present a significant challenge for Will to dodge, leaving him injured and contemplating, "If only I had my sword with me." Will gets badly injured, and wounded Kiki escapes from there. Professor Edward tells Will, to become a Magiavander, he must be capable of handling such situations. Will nods in acknowledgement. The professor uses his 2 spells, a fire flame spell and a shield spell, overlapping them multiple times to attack Will effectively. Meanwhile, Colette sees injured Kiki, trying to open Will's locker. Concerned about Kiki's condition, Colette asks if Will is in trouble. She shakes her head. Despite others doubting him, Will insists he will become a Magiavander. When captured, Edward tells Will about war between dwarfs and mages, where a single mage defeated 10,000 dwarf soldiers with his magic. Will, a non-magic user, challenges magician's abilities. Will confidently declares he will become a Magiavander despite any challenges. He explains he made a promise to Elphiria that he intends to keep. He loves Elpharia and wants to stand beside her. Just then, Colette arrives and throws a sword towards Will. Will receives the sword and puts on glasses given by Elphiria, transforming into a warrior. In the background, during the dwarfs' fight, their leader shows remarkable strength against a mage, eventually delivering a successful blow. Inspired by the dwarf's leader's determination, Will breaks through a magic shield and prepares to attack. Suddenly, the professor aims his wand at Will, and Will points his sword at the professor. It seems Will might not land his attack, but then we see blood flowing from the professor's cheeks, indicating he's been injured. After that, Professor Edward gave Will 5 credit points and left. After the fight, Will was quite tired and fell asleep right there. On the other side, Professor Werkner and Headmistress praised Will for giving tough competition to the mage, despite not able to use any magic. Will remembered the time when Elfaria left for the tower. Before she left, he promised her he'd climb the tower one day, even without magic, and they'd watch the sunset together. She smiled through tears and said she'd always wait for him. Will cried as she left. Later, he told Professor Werkner he wouldn't cry aloud anymore. The scene then shifted to Will delivering newspapers in the city to support himself. He met Donnan, who cheered him on, saying they'd meet at Gina's place tomorrow. Will continued, almost tripping on stairs, but catching the newspapers with his skills, except for one. Picking it up, he read that Elfaria had developed 12 new magic spells. Seeing her hard work inspired him to do the same. He noticed she'd ordered something from the academy. Later in his dorm, he asked Rosti to make a magic item for him urgently. When asked why, he explained Elfaria's order and his plan to skip classes to gather ice cores from the Frostwalker's labyrinth. Will says he needs lots of magic items, and students will get paid for what they find. He asks for his magic items to explore the 4th floor, and Rosti can't say no to Will when he sees his excitement. He gives it to him, says he's upgraded it. Will thanks him, and Rosti gives him bread for breakfast before leaving. Later, the narrator says that Mage Queen Mercedes believes that everything comes from the dungeon. She tells everyone to conquer it using their brains. Then we see Will on the 4th floor, watching many students fight Frostwalkers. He thinks Elfaria must have ordered it, impressed how she commands everyone. He spots Xion there too, using fire spells on Frostwalkers. Xion thinks these weaklings won't make him stronger, remembering how tough Will was against the Sentinel. Will senses Xion's power and anger, knowing he can't hunt Frostwalkers here. He goes deeper and finds monsters attacking a girl student. He saved her by swiftly killing the monsters, so fast that the girl couldn't even understand what happened. Then she saw Will and realized it wasn't magic, but sword fighting. Will asked if she was okay, and nervously she said yes. She thanked him for saving her. He introduced himself, and she introduced herself as Iris Churchill, a 4th-year student. Next, the scene shifts to Professor Werkner, teaching a class at the academy. Many students were absent because of Elfaria's orders. He told them that in this world, creating new magic was a huge achievement, guaranteeing advancement to the tower. New magic was often named after its creator, like the spell Dax Darbicans named after the ancient mage Darbicans. He said creating new magic would make them famous in history, but the students thought it sounded easy, though it wasn't realistic. Rose mentioned the news they read about Elfaria this morning was amazing, as she had created 12 new spells. The professor said it was an extraordinary feat, making her possibly the greatest mage ever. The class wondered if ice magic was now the best, thinking about joining the ice faction. Colette thought Will's childhood friend was incredible, making the whole academy buzz about her. Rose wondered if Colette was jealous that Elfaria might take Will away. Colette got flustered, and the professor scolded them for making noise. Colette wondered if Will went to the dungeon today for Elfaria's sake. Back at the dungeon, Iris realized that Will was the book learner with no magical talent she had heard about. Will felt a bit hurt hearing this, and he found out that Iris was in her 4th year. He wondered if she was bothered by his lack of magic talent, but she casually assured him that she didn't look down on him, calling him her savior. She acknowledged that he couldn't use magic, but still had talent, which she respected. Will was puzzled by her relaxed attitude and wondered if she was here on Elfaria's orders too. Iris confirmed she was indeed here because of Elfaria, wanting to assist the Magia Vanders and play her part in supporting the sky. Will explained that what Iris said wasn't an exaggeration. In their world, the sky they saw was actually a huge barrier created by powerful magic of the Magia Vanders. According to legend, if this barrier fell, darkness would engulf the world, bringing calamity. The students were motivated not only by admiration for the magic Vanders, but also by the belief that they were helping uphold the sky. Iris then shared an experience of meeting Elferia herself. She recounted being alone in a dungeon, surrounded by monsters, and Elferia had appeared suddenly, freezing all the monsters instantly. Elferia had helped her up and warned her to be cautious in the future. Iris recalled this with excitement, mentioning how they had a long conversation afterward. While Iris kept talking enthusiastically, Kiki noticed something, prompting Will to investigate. Iris continued to express her desire to help Elferia, but mentioned she hadn't found a single Frostwalker yet. She suspected the other students might have defeated them all. Despite her search ability failing to locate any, she asked Will what he was up to. Will explained that Frostwalkers left behind small ice shards in their tracks, typically 0.5 to 1 millimeter in size, but he had found one, twice that size. He thinks there's a big Frostwalker ahead that her search can't find. Iris wonders how Will knows this without magic. Will says magic is great in dungeons, but experience matters too. He gets his magic item ready and sees the Frostwalker on the ceiling. He saves Iris from its attack. Iris calls it a Frostrex, a tough kind of Frostwalker, and the floor boss worth 6 credits. The Frostrex shoots a beam. Will dodges while protecting Iris. He tries to fight it, but Iris stops him, saying physical attacks won't work on this monster. She explains it's called a dwarf killer that freezes on touch. Will reassures her, dodges another beam, and hides under the monster. It attacks randomly, while Iris and Kiki dodges monster's attack. Will sticks his magic item to it with a wire and says it's weak to fire and explosives. The Frostrex tries to freeze him, but Will sets the wire on fire and blows up the monster. With the help of magic items, he sticks on the monster. Impressed with Rosty's magic items, Will suggest they head back. Iris changes from serious to happy, ready to go. The scene changes to Iris, walking into a room inside the tower, called Mercedes Callis. As she walks, she changes her appearance. We learn she was undercover at the academy to find talented magicians. She enters a room where 4 out of 5 Magia vendors are gathered. She wonders if she's interrupting, but one named Carriot says it's okay, because if the barrier had been breached, the world would be destroyed by now. Zio thinks the celestial hosts are watching them from the other side, but they don't have the strength to fight them. Eleanor says they need elite mages for the fated day, or the prophecy will come true. They ask Iris if she's found anyone worth recruiting. Iris says during her search, she found a no-talent named Will Serfort, who's worth bringing into the tower. She suggests him, but Carriot and Eleanor aren't interested on inviting a no-talent. Zio finds it interesting. Eleanor doesn't want any more inferior goods around. Zio calls them rigid, and says he'd even invite a dwarf if they were a good fighter, which angers Eleanor. Carriot stops them, saying they should wait until the Grand Magic Festival to decide. Zio agrees, saying talented people will rise on their own and leaves. The others follow. Elferia stays, and Iris tells her that Will is amazing. Elferia holds the magic core from Will and says that she'll always wait for him. In Rigarden Magic Academy, students need 7,200 credit points out of the 12,000 available to move up to the Upper Institute and become a Magiavander. Then, we see Will's class taking a test for credits. Shion, after defeating some golems easily, ends up with 9,889 credits and qualifies for the Upper Institute. Colette also qualifies with 7,340 credit points. Will is fighting a golem to earn credits. He tries to punch it, but his classmates mocks him. This distraction causes the golem to hit Will. The other students make fun of him, saying this is what they expect from a learner who can't even use basic magic. Meanwhile, 2 other students, Lehanna Awenzas and Wignolinder, defeat golems using lightning and wind magic. Lehanna has 10,100 credits, and Wignol has 1075 credit points, so they both qualify too. Then, a student named Julius Reinberg uses ice magic to plant a rose on the golems and activates it to get credits, freezing the golems. Julius ends up with 10,048 credits and also qualifies for the Upper Institute. Lehanna tells them that they are doing well, and Wignol mentions that the banquet is coming up. The top 3 students are Julius, Lehanna, and Wignol. Julius challenges the others to a duel, using his ice rose, but Wignol and Lehanna destroy the rose with their magic and accept the challenge. The other students watch and thinks that this is typical of the top 3 students. They note that only these 3 students have credits above 10,000. Shion, feeling behind, is unhappy with his own credits. We also learn that Will has only 5,405 credits, and he worries that he might not have enough to graduate, since this is Will's last year in the academy. Will is feeling down. Kiki tries to lift his spirits, but before she can, Julius crosses his path and rudely tells him to get out of the way. Will, feeling defeated, says sorry to him. Julius and his followers then walk off. His followers tell him that they expected him to pass easily and are confident that he'll get noticed at the Grand Magic Games. This reminds Will that the games are coming up. In the cafeteria, Colette sits with Will and tells him that getting scouted at the Grand Magic Games is his best chance. She explains that relying only on credits from praxis and writing was never enough, and sometimes students with fewer credits still get scouted. Will sees that everyone is talking about the games. The Grand Magic Games are held every 2 years at Rigarden Magic Academy and feature various contests. High mages come to watch the games and scout for talent. Colette explains that different factions will be competing for the best students. These factions are Ice Faction, Fire Faction, Elf Faction, and Thunder Faction, all led by the current Magyavanders. Mysterious Noah is not included in this list. Colette tells Will that if one of these major factions picks him, he's guaranteed a spot in the upper tower. Will feels overwhelmed, knowing there are many students with more credits than him. He thinks that he needs to show extraordinary magic to stand out. Colette mentions there are other ways to get noticed, such as being scouted by the Watchers. Will notes that Watchers are part of the Academy's 7 mysteries, and feels like he doesn't have the talent to compete. He decides that he'll stay behind the scenes and help with preparations instead. Colette tells Will that joining the games could change people's opinions about him. Will thanks her, but says he's not good enough, since the festival is for mages, and he remembers being blamed for cheating and getting garbage thrown at him during his 2nd year in the Grand Magic Games when he competed. Colette agrees that it was a bad experience, and Will's reputation hasn't recovered since then. As the festival gets closer, students are busy preparing, creating a buzz of excitement. Colette tells Will that even if they don't get picked by the major factions, there will be scouts from the capital, so there's still hope. Will agrees that the games are a good chance to show his talent and decides to consider joining. In the locker room, Will puts his books away and says he can't join the games since he can't use magic. Colette notices a barrier and soundproofing spell on one locker. She asks Kiki to remove them, and they find stairs leading down. They discover a hidden gambling area where students are betting on the Grand Magic Games. Most bets are on the top 3 students. Colette thinks that the students hide this because teachers wouldn't check the locker room. Will is surprised to see Shion there, and Shion is surprised to see him. Colette tells Shion not to bully Will and warns him she'll be very angry if he does. Shion agrees, and Will asks why Shion is there. Shion's lackeys reveal that he's checking the betting odds to see how he stands up against the top 3 students. Shion quickly stops his lackeys from saying more and leaves with them. After Colette makes fun of him, she says it's typical for a boy like him to react that way. Shion explains that he is behind in credits because he failed a writing test, but insists that he is as good in magic as the top students. He questions why he's even bothering to explain to Will and walks away. Later, Will is in potions class. After the class, he tries to leave, but Colette stops him. She nervously asks if he wants to explore the dungeon with her, but he says that he has to go to Gina's tavern tonight. Colette pouts at his answer. The scene shifts to Gina's tavern on Slumland Street. Will notices the tired dwarven miners laughing and drinking. He works as a waiter and serves Donan, who thanks him and comments on how tough Will's life must be, juggling newspaper deliveries, work at the tavern, and academy. Will explains that he didn't get a scholarship, so he needs to work to pay his tuition fees. Donan mentions the upcoming Grand Magic Games and asks if Will is participating. Will says he's not interested. Gina then shouts at Will to get back to work because there are other customers waiting. She points out that Rosti, who is filling in for an absent waiter, is working hard. Will apologizes to Rosti for pulling him into this, but Rosti says it's fine, as he can't ignore his roommate in trouble. Gina asks Will to find another helper because one of her workers quits, but the others are still working hard. The dwarves in the tavern says that there's no need for another helper because Will works hard enough for 2 people. They treat him like family, as he can't use magic, just like them. Then we see Will and Rosti cleaning dishes together. When the tavern is almost empty, Rosti asks Will if he's sure about working here, since dwarven jobs don't pay much. Rosti suggests asking Professor Werkner for a better job, but Will says that he doesn't want to bother the professor and likes working with the dwarves because they're honest and skilled. Suddenly, Julius and his lackeys come into the tavern. Julius is disgusted by the place, but is told by his lackeys that no other restaurants are open now. They see Will working there and are surprised to see him. Julius mocks the dwarves, saying he and Will fit in perfectly. Donan is angry after hearing Julius, but is held back by the other dwarves. Julius insults the dwarves, saying they should be grateful to humans. The narrator explained that the dwarves' world was destroyed by celestial beings, so they came to this world. The dwarves face severe consequences if they ever harm a mage. Julius demands food and drinks, and Rosti serves beans. Julius and his group are repulsed and insult the dwarves' cooking. Will gets upset after hearing them and defends the dwarves, saying the beans are made with their hard work and skill. Julius laughs and mocks Will for not able to use any magic, then throws beans at him. Will doesn't back down, and when the lackeys tell him to leave, Will gets angry and knocks them down, spilling beer on Julius. Julius gets furious and uses magic to freeze the tavern, attacking Will. Will dodges, and Julius pins him to a wall. Julius tries to freeze him, but stops when he sees Will's determined look. Julius challenges Will to the Grand Magic Games, promising to publicly humiliate him. Will agrees to participate, saying if he wins, Julius will have to apologize to Donan and the other dwarves. The scene then shifts to Headmistress Cauldron, announcing the start of the Grand Magic Games. We see Will waiting in the players' dressing room, ready for his competition. The scouts from the Fire faction, led by Rog Holland, are preparing to look for talented competitors and are advised to stay alert. Next, we see Lahanna participating in the Sky Race. The students notice that she is incredibly fast, and everyone believes that she will win. They think this is exactly what they expect from someone they call Miss Perfect. Headmistress notices that scouts from all factions are in the stands, observing everything closely. She comments on how quickly the tower moves, and Iris, standing beside her, explains that there are mages outside the tower, making it a race to grab promising students. Lahanna wins the Sky Race, setting a new record for the fastest time. Iris leaves to attend to her own duties and mentions that she also wants to cheer for a senior. Later, we see Shion's friends congratulating him on qualifying for Crown Attack. They tell him that even though they didn't qualify, they will support him. Shion thanks them and mentions that he couldn't refuse a lady's request. He remembers that Colette begged him to join her team and feels happy that she finally realized he was the best choice over Will. He heads to the players' dressing room, expecting to see Colette, but is surprised to find her talking to Will. He wonders why someone with no talent, like Will, is here. Colette explains that Will was invited to join their team because his total credits were exactly what they needed to qualify for Crown Attack. Shion is shocked and questions why Will, whom he views as a loser, is in such a high-level contest. Will doesn't respond and instead stares at Julius behind Shion. Colette reveals that due to some issues, Will now has to compete in Crown Attack against Julius. Shion is upset that Will is ignoring him after the previous humiliation and is irritated. Meanwhile, the announcer at the arena, Mike Mays, introduces himself as a 6th-year student and his guest commentator Professor Edward, who is known for being disliked. Mike makes fun of Edward and jokes about his meanness. Edward gets angry and threatens Mike with a rough time in his next class. Mike nervously asks for mercy and continues with the Grand Magic Games commentary. He then announces that the main event, called Crown Attack, is about to begin. The Elf faction then uses their magic to create 5 zones around the arena: Marshland Zone, Volcano Zone, Grassland Zone, Badlands Zone, and Woodland Zone. Mike explains that the goal is to grab the crown in the center of the stadium. Competitors will face not only natural hazards, but also traps set by professors. They can either go straight for the crown or block other teams. Mike says it's going to be a wild and intense contest, like a battle royale. Edward is eager to see how the students will handle the challenges, comparing it to a real dungeon dive. He mentions that this year's contest is attracting a lot of attention from scouts because top students are competing. Mike interrupts, highlighting that this is a high-level contest and that top students are participating. According to backroom bets, Squad 12, led by Wignolinder, and Squad 9, led by Julius Reinberg, are favorites to win. Mike also reveals that he has bet his life savings on Wignall. Edward is surprised, and Mike adds that there's another team to watch, Shion's team, which includes Will. They're the least favored to win. Spectators thinks that Will is crazy for joining Crown Attack and ask him to stop embarrassing the Academy. All the squads head to their starting positions, with Professor Werkner guiding them. He's shocked to see Will participating and asks him to stay away from the games. Will refuses, saying he must win, even if everyone laughs at him. Despite the professor's attempts to stop him, Will goes ahead, and the announcer starts the match. Julius's squad faces the first obstacle, a bunch of golems, and all the squads encounter the same problem. Will charges straight at the golems, and other students think it's a foolish move because they believe Will can't defeat them. They remember that he couldn't even scratch a golem during the spell work exam. Will signals Colette for help. Colette uses her magic to give Will a powerful earth gauntlet, and he starts smashing through the golems. The students in the stands are amazed. Will keeps taking down golem, one after another. Werkner expected something like this, and notes that while Will can't use magic himself, using the magic gauntlet is still within the rules. Mike is stunned by Will's strength, and announces that Will is the first to get past the first obstacle. As Will's squad moves to the Badland Zone, they're still leading. They are hit by stone bullets, but Will uses his gauntlet to punch the ground and create an earth shield that blocks the bullets. Before more bullets can come, Colette uses her magic to make swords for Will. Will throws the swords at the magic cubes that create the stone bullets, destroying each one. One sword misses its target, but Will quickly destroys the cube before it can shoot another bullet. Mike announces that Will has just passed the Badlands area. He's surprised, because the least favorite squad is doing so well. The students are also confused and thinks that Colette's magic must be helping, but Rosti says that Will's skill is the main reason. The scouts, including Rhode Holland, are shocked by Will's speed and power. Edward comments that Will's moves show true experience and efficiency. Iris starts cheering for Will. One of the other squads hears that Will's squad is in first place and decides that they can't let a no talent like Will win the game. They try to catch up, but Will is already at the next obstacle. The other squads are mostly in the same position, with Will's squad still leading. Julius hears the commotion and asks his team about it. They tell him that Will's squad is in the lead and Will might win if this continues. Julius isn't worried and says he will stop him. Will's squad reaches the final obstacle, the Enchanted Woods, where they face chained circle traps. Will carves the ground where the traps are set, causing them to destroy each other. Mike is surprised by his progress and wonders if Edward, who set the trap, has anything to say. Edward just clicks his tongue. Will moves forward and thinks that as they get closer to the stadium, they will likely meet other teams. He plans to wait in the forest zone to ambush Julius. Just then, Julius attacks Will with ice spears, but Will dodges them. Will is confused how Julius is here before him and realizes that he has to fight him, and sees Shion surrounded by flames. He casts a spell that melts the ice spears. Shion continues casting his spell, and his teammates are shocked. Colette sees that Will is in danger and tells him to dodge. Will is too slow, so Colette protects him with an earth barrier. Shion's spell hits, and the audience at the stadium feels the blast. Mike wonders where the shockwave came from. Afterwards, Will is bruised and confused, seeing the forest destroyed. Shion tells Julius to leave because he's in his way. Colette realizes that Shion's spell was meant for both Julius and Will. She asks Shion what he is doing. Shion says that he has been following orders, but won't do so anymore and demands payment. He tells Will to fight him. Will is confused and asks why, but Shion attacks him. Will dodges, and Shion says he doesn't need a reason to fight. Colette tries to stop them, but Julius freezes her. Will is distracted, and Shion disarms him. Will asks Shion to stop and says it's not the time to fight. Shion tells Will to pick up his sword. Will picks up his sword, and they prepare to fight. If you like this story, please subscribe to my YouTube channel.